Hello, everybody. Welcome to Adobe Live. My name is Benjamin Ward. I'm a product manager on the Lightroom team, and I am back again today with photographer Cyn Lagos. Super excited to have Cyn back here again today. We had a show yesterday where Cyn talked about editing your photos to optimize for print, which was really cool. A really cool thing for me to see, actually. I learned a ton. We're back today. We're going to actually see how Cyn works within the print module now in Lightroom. Cyn, do you want to say a few other words about what you'll be covering today?
Sure. So, first of all, welcome back. Thank you for coming back and we're going to complete this whole journey that we are embarking on for print. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit more on the technical side of things. And there's some of you who are going to really enjoy that part. I know that there's kind of a double brain here when it comes to being creative and also being technical. This is going to be the print dialogue in Lightroom, and we're going to explore all the little things that are going to really help the image represent and replicate the same image we see on our monitors.
That is awesome. Okay, let me just say a couple other things before I turn it over to you for this goodness. I just want to say hi to some folks. We have a lot of folks who've tuned in again from yesterday. Hi, Noor. Hi, Andreas. Hi, Ferry. Hi, Emma. Here's my blanket apology again for mispronouncing people's names. Also, a quick heads up that the XD session that was originally scheduled to come after this has unfortunately had to be canceled last minute, but there will be an XD design challenge this afternoon, 2 p.m. Pacific. So that's still going on. And if you are watching us on YouTube, on the YouTube live stream, welcome. We're so happy to have you. You might want to consider switching over to the live stream on behance.net because if you are on Behance, there is a chat pod and you can submit your questions live in the chat pod. I will relay your questions to Cyn for her to address throughout today's show. So if you do have questions, please don't hesitate to type them in the chat. It just makes this whole thing much more lively and engaging and educational for everybody. With that, I will turn it over to you, Cyn.
Awesome. Okay, so a bit of a brief on what we did yesterday. So we were on the developing side of things, where we, where we really focused more on how we expressed our colors through storytelling, but also how we kept in mind the final effort, which is to experience this in print rather than our usual go-tos, which is posting that on our portfolios on our websites or on our social platforms. So this kind of changed a bit the way we made our decisions and the editing process. And these are some of the photos that we were able to edit. So just give you a bit of a view on some of these that we'll be printing today. Okay, so I'm really excited to be able to show you how I finally was able to take this from digital to print. And genuinely, it's always such a thrill to be able to see a brand new image into print format because it's always a little bit different. The lighting conditions and the final editing, color correcting is different for each image. So the way it prints, I mean, this is one of those things where like the experience can't be basically shared unless you see it yourself, but we're going to attempt to do that today. I'll show you a few examples that I think are going to give you more of a sense of why you would print a certain way over another and the different formats that have become helpful for me to share in my print shop. I've noticed that different sizes are necessary. I've noticed that there's different needs in terms of borders and sizes. So we'll talk about those things today. For now, let's jump right into the print section of Lightroom. And I know this section, maybe not a lot of you are familiar with, or if you are, this is wonderful. There's going to be a few things that even for me, I was able to find these little gems that were able to help me sort of ease my workflow. Also, this print section can be used for a lot of other things. I've often used the layout section for things like creating layouts for my site. If I didn't want to jump right into Photoshop, I was able to just find some of the templates that are here and set them up and share some of these layouts to my clients as well. So I'm going to show you right away what layouts I'm talking about. So inside the template browser within Lightroom, you're going to find different layouts. Some of them are standard, like the 4x6, 5x7 sizes. So if you ever wondered, how can I make, okay, my original image isn't that particular size. Now I have to go into Photoshop or have to like resize everything. I'm worried I'm cropping too much and it's going to mess with my composition. All of those things, you would be able to see it in a single click. And that's what makes this a lot easier than doing it manually in other applications, right? So right away, I see that my file, thankfully, this one's a vertical, so I'm able to see that it fits pretty well here. It wouldn't be the same if I had, for example, this one. I would actually have to kind of toggle left and right and try to find that composition or the area where I'm okay to sort of let go of and know that it's going to be cropped. You can also choose not to have, under image settings, you can choose not to have the image zoom to fill. And what that means is that it's going to honor the original size. This might mean that you have borders on the sides, and here, before anything else, I have a Canon Pro 100 series, and in it, I like printing a 13x19 size, which is one of its bigger sizes without the rolling adapter. And that is all picked up by Lightroom because it already knows that that's one of my printers. That's the one that I set up. So if you see that something's a little bit odd here, it might mean that you have another printer being reflected. So you just want to go to your page setup and select that particular printer, right? So if I have the HP Office Jet, it goes up to, I think, a legal size. So it's not that big of a print. So I want to make sure that I'm sending these print management to the correct printer, and it'll pick that up right within the Lightroom interface. So we're back here, and I think a couple things I constantly have to think about is, okay, so if I print this in this size, then I'm sort of wasting some of my paper here, and that's a bummer because that paper is really expensive, and that's an overhead that I have to think about. I chose this paper, and it's the luster paper specifically for Canon because it works with the Canon inks technology. So what that means for me and for the person who purchases my print is that they have a fine art print in their hands that's going to be durable, and it's going to go withstand the sun conditions or any like things that are going to maybe tamper with the color over time. And so if I want to guarantee that, I want to make sure that I'm printing in this paper and with this ink. The paper choices are up to you. You can get creative. I'm making that decision based on its durability. So that's the paper we have here, and I definitely don't want to waste it. So what I can do in situations like that is I think, okay, maybe I can print 2 at a time. And for situations like that, you also have these pre-made templates in the back end. So I can choose to have a layout like this, or I can actually get more experimental and find some really interesting layouts here. I've actually used these layouts in the past to show my the selects of a particular photo shoot to the client, and they absolutely love it. And that becomes sort of like this really interesting presentation that took me seconds to make. And the reason why that's important is if you want your client to move forward with certain selects, you know, as often we tend to have different tastes, but those pictures are a representation of your work. So you do want your selects to be the ones to be out there in the world, right? So just being able to have a good presentation and not just show these tiny thumbnails can be a very good way of easing that process and getting your client to select the right photos for the photos that you want, right? So that's another way I use it beyond print. So let's look here. There's a few images. If I was to print two at a time, I'm not entirely restricted on printing that same image. So for example, if I want to drop this image here, I can choose to print that image twice, right? Or I can choose to print a different image alongside it. That can get tricky because if you're choosing a particular color profile for your paper, something we talked about yesterday, you can select color profiles which are downloadable, and you can request them from your printer. You can request them from your paper source. And those are really good to be able to just honor the colors that you have on your image. So you send it proof. It's kind of a process. But because we chose to edit our images within Lightroom, keeping in mind the ways the prints can kind of become erroneous in terms of brightness, contrast, and saturation, we are actually able to toggle around some of the images within one single sheet because we know we already compensated for those particular issues. And that's going to help us in like being able to print various images within one single sheet. So this is something I would do. Here in this section, you can see how it's like, for example, bigger than the other image. So when it comes to cutting, that can become a bit of a headache. So I like to be able to like fit it within the print or adjust it myself. You can actually toggle this section here. So you have these grids back here that can help you see more or less if this is a perfect match. And the reason why that's important is beyond post-processing, this can get a bit manual when it comes to cutting these images. So I pick up my X-Acto knife and my T-ruler and I cut these out. But sometimes I don't have straight lines. So it does help to be able to do a single run and then just cut a bunch of images and know that those lines are going to be perfect. So being able to see those rulers, grids, and guides really helps while you're setting this up on the sheet. So I like to turn these on all the time. Sometimes I like to turn on dimensions, but it's not absolutely necessary because I like to play with the layout quite a lot. I will like to have a reference of this so that I can, write it within the description on my shop, but it's not always, kind of gets in the way for me. I like including image cells. I like including the page grid because, as I said, it helps me see that alignment. Being able to see the ruler as well kind of lets me know that, oh, I'm working on the right page or the right size of my paper, and I'm not set up on a different printer by accident, because that really sucks. Like when you're doing this entire work and all of a sudden you find yourself in the wrong dimensions. So having that kind of at first view it's great. So this is more for your workflow within Lightroom. This will not show up in your final print. Those grids are not going to be printed on the final print.
Cyn, I just wanted to let you know that there is some nice engagement in the chat here and several comments, comment from Cody, comment from Emma, that they had no idea that this functionality existed here in Lightroom Classic. Yeah. So that's why we do these. It's fantastic to see this. And Jan, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Jan, or maybe it's Jan. commented that I hear printing from Photoshop can be very convoluted. I would never throw another Adobe product under the bus, but I will say that printing in Lightroom Classic is a really fantastic experience because it's so much like what you see is what you get kind of thing. It makes it really easy. I mean, Cyn said this already, but it makes it really easy to really pre-visualize what it's going to look like on the page. It's really cool.
Yeah, I have used Photoshop in the past to do these same steps, but I mostly went there because it's a program that I was so accustomed to just like manipulating images and making them smaller, bigger, however I wanted to. But when I found this particular space, I realized, oh, okay, this is all pre-made for me to be faster and more efficient. So in a way, I don't have to work with layers. This is already set up for me to just drop them in. And it's also honoring that you'll see down the road here is honoring that dots per inch or pixels per inch. And it's not going to be messing with the photo, because sometimes in Photoshop, unless you're truly doing that, you're devoting Photoshop to resize your image. If you're just pushing and pulling those images, you're really messing with the way the algorithm is actually determining how those pixels are stretched. So I always sort of, if I'm making an image bigger on Photoshop, I'm going to do that very intentionally and not just push and pull. Whereas here, I know that it's honoring that PPI while I'm playing with the sizes or different dimensions, and because it's specifically for this. So,
Cyn, there was sorry, can I interrupt with a question from the audience real quick? This is a little bit off topic, but definitely related. I'm curious as well. There's a question from Jan asking, have you made photo books in Lightroom Classic with the book module?
So I actually haven't necessarily made an entire book here, but it is really cool to be able to see how you can make because photo books are specifically just images. I did make a book that has narration in it. It's here somewhere. We'll get to that maybe sometime during the live stream. And it was really interesting for me to do that. Of course, it's another special medium to be able to have your work printed, but in a book medium, right? I did do that in InDesign because I love InDesign. I'm honestly like an avid user of every program kind of by chance. I just thought, okay, well, can I do this here? Can I do that there? But I do come into these fun surprises where I see that there are a lot of tools that if you had a question, like, I wonder if I can make a book here, somebody thought about it and there's an option for it. So maybe that's a live stream for the future. I would like to challenge myself to create another, maybe a zine, a magazine. That could be a lot of fun and provide that print on the shop. Just gave me a good idea. Yeah. So let's continue here. In a matter of just talking, I was able to drop a different layout just by using a template and dropping in all of the other photos in here. And you can see that here I have some borders on the images, and that at first, it doesn't look appealing to me, but I have found a purpose for it in the past. So that border will be found here in the image settings, and the image settings allows you to kind of get rid of them altogether or change the width of those borders. I think by default it's in black because images do really pop when they're in a black border in general. Like most of the prints that I have framed on my wall, I love to frame them on black or white, and I do choose the black based on like how much I want the color to pop, or the white knowing that it's not going to wash out that image. And so if you're selling the prints without a frame, which I often have a few options where I do have the print with, borders with an actual frame, but that can get expensive. So I do provide a lot of prints kind of by themselves alone. And I do notice that if I put these in my packaging, they just look way more presentable. And I can choose between, I don't go crazy and put other colors. You might want to do that because your artistic expression is different from mine, and maybe your work is a lot more conducive to different color palettes, or you're trying to follow your branding. I mean, there's a plethora of choices here that you can make based on the color, but so long as they're intentional, I think if it kind of fits. If you're thinking of fine art prints, I like to stick with black or white. So I like the white also because it allows me to sort of create these borders and separation. And it really looks really neat. Like when I'll show you some examples in a little bit, but it looks really neat to be able to just get this print that already has that border, and it also serves as sort of a padding section so that when you do frame it in the future, this is also one of the situations that like nobody told me this, but when I was framing and I had a beautiful like edge to edge printing, but then I put it inside a frame and I would see that the frame itself was just over the ink. So now when I remove that frame, instead of protecting my print, I actually sort of like put it kind of exposed it to that exposed my ink to those edges. So by creating that border, you're creating a padding of where your frame, your final frame is going to go. Or you can just have it this way and it's going to look really appealing to just have it bordered already. So it serves two purposes, I think, on my end. So that's again here on the image settings. And I think I'm going to keep it in this section. I also want to talk about what if I don't want to print those small images? What if I want to take advantage of that entire sheet, which you know, a lot of people tend to, I get huge requests on printing larger and larger and larger. And I'm a bit constricted depending on like the printer that I use. If I need a bigger print and the customer is willing to pay for me to outsource, then I provide that option. However, when I'm doing prints here, I do 13 by 19 prints at the max, and I'm able to do borderless. So I make those decisions here on Lightroom. So for example, a print like this one, we can choose a maximize size template. And that's gonna give me that maximum size. Of course, it's gonna allow that printer to just choose the rest of the settings, which is gonna be something that we decide at the very end. You'll see in a bit. But again, we go back here and we're able to decide the type of fill that we want on that size. So if I zoom fill, I have to keep an awareness that I'm cropping that image. So sometimes that isn't something I want because I want actually a print that is panoramic, you know, like those panoramic images are super cool. In the past, I've actually sold a set of 3 images where I was able to divide those 3 images in it was one single image, but I was able to divide it into 3 13 by 19s, and it became sort of like this cool artistic way of setting up 3 prints on your wall. And so there's kind of like room for you to just see a challenge and find a different way of solving it within your restrictions, right? So in this image, if it's going to be zoom to fill and it's going to be cropped, I'm going to toggle it around until I find that perfect like section that I don't want cropped, right? I would do the same thing here in this image because this image is actually really fairly long. So you'll see how much I'm actually cropping in this image. And I chose to actually print this image this way because I think I really wanted to show off that scale of the Art Deco buildings, and also like the scale of the sky versus the buildings is kind of the fun part of this, the fun technique that I used in this image. And so I don't want to like forego that just because my print is not the right, I mean, my sheet is not the right size, right? So there's always cropping, but also these borders kind of look really aesthetically pleasing. It almost looks like the Polaroids, right? Like the Polaroids always have that border at the bottom, and it has become very, very much sort of like the staple of that, the signature of Polaroids. So there's a way to kind of just like take it on and say like, this is just the way I like to showcase my panoramic photos, or this is the way I like to showcase my landscape photos, and create a consistency. I think consistency is really important because people want to have a sense of like, you're doing this with love and care. And I hope you are, because these images honestly are really rewarding when you get them at the end. They're just so, it's so pleasant to see something in front of you and see it even when you're like at home and walking by, and or have your friends have had friends over and they're just like in awe that, you know, wait, you took that photo, you didn't buy that photo? And it's like, yeah, I took that photo. And then I have prints from my friends too. So I'm like, yeah, that one I bought, it was my friends. Just having that support and being able to like experience it just standing and staring at a photo is just phenomenal. I think that is a bit underrated, frankly. So comment if you have actually had the experience of printing some of your photos, or if you have yet to have that experience. I think that is kind of like a rare one of those moments of like my first time printing my work, you know, was pretty special. So if you haven't yet, give it a shot. I'm sure because you're here, you're probably a bit more involved into the practice and the craftsmanship of printing. So give this a try. I think that would be really cool to see, and like share it with us later. Share with me at Cyn Lagos on Instagram. I would love to see that. So again, coming
Cyn, can
back
I
to,
can I
yeah,
interject with a question from the audience? Ferry
yeah.
asks about. I believe this question is about a moment ago when you were using the zoom to fill. Was asking about how you were dragging or moving the photo around.
Yeah, so I actually, well, I don't even have to double click it. Like it literally is a situation where if I have the zoom to fill, let's put the zoom to fill. Okay, so you can see here there's like almost like the Mickey Mouse hand. And so that kind of gives you the I guess the sign that like you are able to drag it. So it's just dragging really. There isn't a lot of cropping up on the top, and I mean, I'm looking at it this way, but there's no cropping on the left and the right side, so I don't have room to toggle on that side. So it's mostly up and down for me in this image, but you would be able to do that as well if you needed to. And there is no needing to click extra buttons. It's actually a pre decision, I guess, that is already like this is a composition decision, right? So
And
it's already within the software.
if you are printing landscape and you get tired of turning your head, you can go into page settings and rotate the paper as well.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you can. I think you can actually. I just marked that as rejected by
I don't think
mistake.
you should reject it. It's a really nice one.
No, I should never reject
You
it.
know.
Yeah, so it's one of those. I love being able to see my prints this way too, like a full preview. Um, I think I hit F on that one for me to be able to see it, just to get a sense of like what the work looked like. I think after a while, you stare at a photo for so long, you start to forget like what is it that you did to the image. Um, and so it's also like nice to have that moment of just backing away and just staring at like all the progress. Sometimes to be able to decide whether there's enough contrast before you go to print, or if there's enough saturation or enough brightness, because once you print, I mean, that ink goes through and that mistake is like, oh no. So I actually want to jump into a few of these examples to be able to share with you some of the things that I do. I'll do it in just a bit. Before we do that, let me run through this final template that I actually use quite often. Specifically, it's called a contact sheet. So I use this template specifically to do a test of all the colors. So of all the images that I'm printing. So sometimes I put in the same image a couple of times with different settings. So I'll put this image with a bit more brightness, with a bit more saturation, a little less, maybe a bit more blue. We talked yesterday about how in the ink, oftentimes what gets lost is the warmth. So anything that's yellow might become a bit more opaque. So a warm sunny day might look a little bit opaque, which can translate to, wait, this isn't a beach setting. This isn't a beautiful happy day. It looks a little bit like you have a different weather. And so being able to play with those colors and those saturations and putting different ones in here is a way for me to test before I do a whole run through of a full edge to edge print, right? So otherwise, I like to do like a full sheet where I'm able to so this is kind of more of a situation of selecting all of them. So I'll hold shift and select all of them this way. And that is going to print tiny thumbnails of my images. And I can do a test and sacrifice one sheet. And I would do this on the paper I aim to print on. So there is a test sheet that I'm going to sacrifice. If at any given point, like I want to do this again, then I'll just flip the sheet around manually on the printer and do this again, and it'll print on that other side. So I can show you a test that I did based on that. I think I have it actually here. Give me a second.
While Cyn is stepping away, I will use that opportunity to let you guys know that in just about an hour, we'll be doing our artist spotlight for today, where we take a look at the work of another artist on Behance. So I'm looking forward to that one. Some really nice stuff. And we'll take a peek at that a little bit later on. And for anybody who's just joining us, this is Cyn Lagos, and she is teaching us about her printing workflow.
All right, so we're gonna focus here. We're gonna do a quick focus on the canvas here to try to see how we can show this. Let me know if you're able to visibly see it. Okay, so this is a test sheet I ran based on this. At the time, I think I had it a little bit, you can see these are square. I actually set them to their original size so that I can see the full on image. And I printed them also, you can see here that it reflects the name. And that is also helpful in case you want to send your client a full-on contact sheet and they are choosing this image versus another image, or if you're sending your customer who wants a printed image and they want to see a contact sheet, that's your prerogative, what relationship you have with this customer. But I've had that situation where I was requested a custom print for their brand new house, and I had done a mock-up of what it would look like. That was the 3 prints of what it would look like if we printed a series. And I did a contact sheet. And that contact sheet was able to allow us both to see how the prints would look and how it would reflect in their living space. And kind of reinforce that like color palette they had going on, which I thought was really cool process to do. So this is an example of that. And I'm able to see here how those colors jump out, and if I'm missing any contrast that I should compensate for. And so I can jump back into the develop module and compensate for those contrasts or compensate for the color. If I think it was in this image here that I wasn't able to see a lot of the blue on the sky. So that happens quite often. You miss out on that opportunity to showcase blues or yellows. It's also one of the first things to run out. So it's kind of, you have to be very selective on that decision. So doing a test print helps you make those decisions based on what the color is going to look like before you do a full run. And I find it really, really helpful. It's also very satisfying to be able to see the tiny thumbnails. Sometimes I even cut these up and I keep them and like give them away to my friends. And, like you can even use them as like business cards if you choose to. Why not? It's just such a cool fine art print in just a tiny little format. So no need to waste away ink. I do keep these as references. Most often I archive them and keep them as like a future reference. If somebody requests one of these prints again, then I know exactly how they were replicated, because at that point, sometimes I run out of the prints because I sold them. So I don't actually have a large expression of that print for me to reference. So having this sheet in my archives is very helpful.
Cyn, there are a couple questions from people. There's a question from Sean. You mentioned a moment ago about like doing like work for a client and kind of getting them test prints and so on. And the question is about, do you ever do mock-ups? Like, do you take a picture of a client's wall and then like mock up what prints would look like on the wall?
Yeah, I did do a mock-up for this particular client because their ceilings were really high. So our biggest concern was that having just a 13 by 19 print wasn't going to suffice. So it was a very collaborative experience because I basically went out of my way to even recommend the right frame that can have those extra borders that are like, you have the border, but then you have this extra padding in the middle, and it's very elegant, right? But it was, for us, it was a way to make up for not having that giant photo print. So we did that, and we did 3 of them, and we printed 13 by 19s with them. And knowing the border and the frame that we were going to use allowed me to know the type of stroke border that I was going to use here on Lightroom, because I already knew that I was going to create that padding so that the image wouldn't get damaged. So that was really cool. We did create a mock-up at the end based on his image. I did do that in Photoshop though, because Photoshop is great for mock-ups. I mean, at least for me, that's my go-to.
And then there's another question, a question from Ferry asking about how to market himself and his work, or herself. I guess I don't know. Sorry, again, everyone, for mispronouncing everybody's names and not knowing whether people are, how people are gendered.
The nature of live streams.
Yeah, exactly. I'll say he. But marketing himself while he's still in high school. But actually, I think that's a broader question in general. Like, for any of us, like how do you promote your work and promote sales of your prints and so on?
So I find that this changes quite a bit because I try to get, sometimes I get really creative, and I realize that maybe I'll tell you 3 different ways that have been consistent for me. I do have my shop directly on my website. So I host my website with Squarespace, and Squarespace has an e-commerce interface that is really conducive to promoting. So I'm able to promote directly from there through my newsletters, or sometimes when people don't know, and that it's harder for people who are starting because you might not have a list of people who to email your newsletter to, right? So I know a lot of us build our audiences on social media platforms. So I did realize that was important for me on my end as well. So I connected my shop on Instagram. And so Instagram now has a way for you to have a shop. So I went through the really crazy way of being able to connect my e-commerce site to Instagram. So I do promote it that way too. Oftentimes though, like just creating a post on Behance and showcasing that this is what I'm working on, and look at how I did this, like I printed this, and creating a really cool storyline from head to toe. That is an audience absolutely dedicated to design and creativity. So for me, promoting myself is like the medium changes, but it's really about like what audience is really intrigued on this particular medium, because print might not be something someone in social media is interested in. I find that not absolutely, but someone on Behance really has a degree of of opinion for like the fine art work. And, you know, we're so in there because we love to see the international work like represented everywhere. At least for me, has always become like this vault of what else is happening out there in the design and creative world. So I would think in terms of that, the medium will always change, but ask yourself, where is that audience that would be interested in your type of work? Because you might not, I've shipped to people that I don't know, that I've never met in my life. And it's just really beautiful to be able to see how many people can appreciate your point of view. And now they have a new medium to be able to appreciate your point of view and not just through a screen. Yeah, so I hope that helps. I know that that's a tricky process, and it's lengthy. You got to keep up. You got to create a cadence for yourself eventually, a schedule, and all of that is sort of putting on that business hat and deciding like how that works out for your brand. So I hope you're still able to see this. I did want to show you some more examples on here of what we talked about. So some of these layouts that I talked about, I was able to print these earlier today. Unfortunately, I'm not able to like bring the camera all the way up to my printer, but here I have some examples of how I was able to print several images within one single sheet, which I will later cut. And I will have this, I have these extra borders here to be able to show me, save that space and have that division. And this way I have a smaller size image. Coming from a business standpoint, I'm thinking I have an image that is at a lower cost, that is for someone who just wants to support my work, has an access to this type of image. And so this is the way I like to create a few prints at a time. I'm not very excessive on prints. Most of the prints I do create are based on demand, or I create a series of images that have a certain number of prints that, you know, I put up on my shop for people to collect. But I do like to create series because I think it's really special. It's such a process to be able to have that perfect color. So one, on just like the fact that the process is lengthy, but also because it's kind of nice to be able to just know that, you know, you leave room for another series to pop up, and it could be a whole another perspective, because as we know, we all have so many photos. And, you know, we got to kind of be selective on which ones we print. And so I have this beautiful print here that actually was a landscape photo, and I toggled it around so it fit into this vertical view. And I did the same thing for these two. So you can see that they actually function vertically. This was originally a vertical photo, but this is one other way where you're able to recreate that image and create a new composition. And so that image of the New York streets here in Manhattan, I was able to print it finally after doing some test runs of some things that I kept running into, where losing that blue or losing the warmth on the building. And this is a summer in New York. So I thought, you know, I have to be able to do a few test runs before that happens, because this is quite a lot of ink that's going to be wasted otherwise. And it's sort of a bummer when you have such an editing value to your photos, but then you're not able to see that editing finesse, because a lot of us are more than just photographers. We have a very specific discipline, and just the post-editing process, at least for me, it's always been a very special place for me to just play around and experiment. I know that it's very common for people to say, oh, well, you just have to have a consistent look. I don't believe in that. I love Lightroom because I get to experiment to create my own presets and, you know, share them with you on my shops, and be able to have different ones for my visit to New York, my visit to Chicago, my visit to Japan, because the light conditions and everything changes. And also because the story changes. So for me, it becomes a kind of uh, a new challenge to say, okay, well, Japan is sort of more robust, and the way I experienced Tokyo was just so like crisp. And can I translate that over in my editing? And so like being able to know that your print is going to respect that whole editing um, you know, value that you added to your image is honestly wonderful. So that's this image. I really, really like this. I think I'm gonna put it up on the shop, or maybe frame it. Probably print it a couple more times now that I have my settings, and I'll show you in a bit, once you do create your settings, how we can save these actions as presets or templates, so that you don't have to worry about spending this amount of time per print each time. The idea here is to ease your workflow, to really gauge how each step of the way is going to impact your print. But most importantly is to be able to reprint those images knowing that it's going to be exactly the same each time, right? And so this is another photo that I chose to keep the borders. I can cut this out. I can completely make it borderless. I really like this, actually. I have a border here at home where I have 2 frames only on the top and bottom, and it looks very almost artisan in a way, in the way that canvases used to be hung. So I think this is kind of a reflection of that, and I really like it. So I might actually keep it that way. So, you know, there's ways to kind of get artistic and redefine the way that you're printing. I know like it's all the rage to print edge to edge, because why not, right? That is really lovely. And I'll show you a print that looks like that, so that we give everything a fair chance. So these prints are all hot off the press pretty much. And sorry, you can't hear me, I stepped away from the mic. So these prints are just really beautiful when they're edge to edge as well. But if your printer can't do that, that's where being able to do those manual borders in an artistic way could be a good creative solution. This print we edited yesterday, and one of our concerns was being able to showcase that purple to blue gradient and being able to see that dark silhouette. In this image, we decided that we weren't missing information. We didn't need to showcase information within our shadows because contrast was more important. And also because situations where your shadows are lifted up are usually, for me, oftentimes is if I have a photo of a face, a portrait, I want some of those shadows not to be absolutely black ink. I want those shadows to have nuances of the face structure, or in general, some of that information within the image. In this case, I think what was really cool was being able to see the colorful sunrise in contrast with this very stark silhouettes of the Joshua trees in California. I think it came out wonderful. I'm really lucky to be able to have a printer that does edge to edge. Is really seamless. So that's really nice to have just that option there. And equally, we had this final print, which is the same image, but at nighttime. And you can see there how the image was able to showcase the blues. And I compensated a lot in my digital form. I mean, my digital image. I really made these trees kind of ridiculously orange. But now in the final print, it looks just the way I wanted it to, because it will be basically whatever you do will be dialed down. So you have to, if you want it to be bright, you have to make it brighter. if you want it to be saturated, you want it to be colorful, you have to make it more colorful, because in the print format, there is no backlight here, making it that experience that you have with a monitor or your phone. In fact, some people recognize that so much that when they frame images on a wall, sometimes they invest in doing specific fine art lighting just to be able to like show it off that much more. And that's just, those are like those external things, but things that you can keep in mind for, your customer. And I love this photo. I'm really happy with the way this one came out also, because just the blues and oranges are that beautiful depiction of film that I love having in my photos, and seeing the detail of the stars that I was able to capture. It just really honors that moment, and the colors as well. So let's put that one away. So let's continue here and drop any questions that you may have in terms of doing your own prints, but also doing your own print business. It has been a very interesting experience for me in general. A lot of lessons that I've learned throughout the way, and being able to have this workflow at hand has been very helpful as well. So let's continue here on. Okay, so let's.
Cyn, there's no questions at the moment, but I wanted to share a couple comments. From Emma and from Lisa, saying beautiful prints and I love it. So just wanted you to know that was coming through in there. Also a comment from Jan, which I will read verbatim here, which says, so I have another screen down here with the chat on it, which is why I'm looking over here. If Earth gets hit by a direct solar flare, all electronic devices will be fried, including all digital images. Prints will be all that remain if they survive the ensuing fires. I want to put aside the
glim.
Put aside the apocalyptic hyperbole. I think the point is great, right? Like actually having like a tangible thing that you're not dependent on like a functioning computer to view and stuff. It's really special to have these as physical things, I think.
Yeah, I mean that if that is your motivation to make prints, I think that's wonderful. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of nuts to think about that, but it is one of those reasons why books are printed, why it's so beautiful to this day. Like even if we watch TV, but like reading a book or having a tangible something like that you own is so precious. That's why being able to just witness something in front of you is really special. But it is true. I am sure I've thought about that a few times, just having that artifact. Like our images are aging every single day. And as such, they're becoming to some degree historical, because as we know, life changes and things change like pretty drastically sometimes. But being able to take photographs is that special time capsule. And it's almost like, where are you going to keep that time capsule? Because I have run into those things of like, wow, I keep so many things in the cloud and I keep so many things on hard drives. But having that tangible print is just maybe another extension of those artifacts, for me. I totally relate to that statement. Well, why not have some post-apocalyptic ready prints? Okay, so I did get a few questions, by the way, on my Instagram account. I thought this one was very peculiar, whether you should be printing with JPEG or PNGs when you send a print to an outsourced printer. And I think in my experience, it's always been about sending the file that they're able to dig into. So PNGs, PDFs, or the full raw file sometimes helps them read all the information that they can relay to their printers. So it's never really been JPEGs for me for some reason. So there's that question answered. Let's move on to our layouts. So I wanted to just finalize this layout section with this section here, where you're able to customize all of these presets that are, templates that we have here on Lightroom. So you can see here how you can manipulate those sizes directly. And that can allow you to basically create your own template. And that's how I was able to make that grid so that it still had that horizontal view. So you'll see how I'm able to move the rows and the columns. If I have just a few files and I want to be able to maybe create more spacing in between them. If I wanted to, I'm actually going to venture into creating my own stickers on this printer. So I got a few sheets that I want to be able to create. So being able to make them like this and having the ability to just say, I think it's usually selecting them this way. Yeah, I always do that. Having the ability to just have some images in there. And I love being able to print stickers because I place them everywhere. And it's just so much fun to have like just your photo, like here it is. And experimenting with print in so many different ways is just like, it can be a fine art print, or it can be as casual as a sticker, or as casual as an exhibition plastered on the street, right? Like it's your prerogative, but the creativity is like really where you really enjoy yourself and the expression of your work. So you have those customizations there in case you need it. So let's talk about the page sizes here. By the way, just a reminder that those are templates that they come with Lightroom, but you're also able to pretty much create your own template. So you press this plus sign here, and if this is something that you really like, and you want to name this, oh, these are my sticker templates, then you can actually create your own and you don't have to redo this every single time. And then you'll have your sticker templates right here under the user templates. And as such, you can also have all of these other layouts so that when you have, for example, an edge-to-edge print, or a print with the full borders, or this one, and I want to replicate that, I can again hit the plus sign and just rename this border full print. And I'll be able to find that and just set that up in the future and know that that's how I'm going to be able to print that, reprint that over time.
Cyn, there's a question. I think you spoke to this a little bit yesterday, but maybe you can talk about it again. A question from Laxman asking, what paper do you use for your fine art prints?
Yeah, we talked about this yesterday. I do have a good collection of paper that I've experimented with. I have sort of resolved to use some of the Canon paper most frequently for my fine art prints because of the durability. But for experimentation, I have played with watercolor paper, because it has been really interesting to see how the ink actually falls on that watercolor paper, especially watercolor paper when you're doing a print that has to do with color, because the color just really stands out. It almost seems like someone painted it. And I might do a like small collection of those. It is like a different way of doing that, and the rules are definitely bended because there isn't an ICC profile for that. There isn't a profile you can request for a watercolor paper because it's not supposed to be that fine art print, but who's to say you can't break those rules and just see how it looks. I do also love matte paper because it doesn't reflect any of the light. So it looks really, really beautiful and almost like breathless, like just really nice. These prints that I've been showing you today are actually a mixture of gloss and matte. So the way that the light reflects on them is a lot less than a glossy paper would, but it's also kind of replicating a little bit of that sheen. So it's like pearlized a bit, So you're almost able to see the image stand out a bit more. So I think it's up to you as to what type of print you're using. Another reason why I like using the watercolor paper is, or any texture paper, is for things like nature. This has a lot of sky and water, so the softness is really beautiful. But if you have a picture, for example, here in Austin, there's so many beautiful hikes that take you to these amazing views of just hills and trees all over the place. It's really amazing to be surrounded by so much nature. So if you are a nature photographer, when you print, having a paper that isn't necessarily soft but has a bit of texture can actually add to those that pattern that like is so natural in nature, right? Like all the leaves and the texture on the trees. So being able to recognize that, maybe you're printing underwater photography, so that you might want to think about something softer, or if there's those beautiful what is it called, like when the light comes through the water and it's just like looks gorgeous. If you want to show that off, you might want to use something that's like a bit more glossy, or do the opposite and use matte. I mean, the medium itself can become expressive. I have used doing graphic design for a very long time and doing communication pieces that were print pieces. Oftentimes we had to take into account the touch, the tactility of things to be able to express that extra oomph of like, okay, look how this feels. I mean, we experienced that in business cards, you know, like we experienced the tactility and we just have this different sense of that person for some reason, right? It's kind of wild how that works.
Cyn, there's another question, a question from Ferry asking, do you prefer Canon printers or Epson printers? Now you mentioned you have a Canon, so I feel like
Yeah.
I feel like I know the answer to that, but let me rephrase the question a little bit. Like, how did you decide on a printer? How did you decide what to get for yourself?
So when I was in college, I often used the large format Epson printers. So I do know what they're like, and they're honestly really wonderful too, especially for their floor-based large format printers that can print wild, like billboard size images. The Canon printer became a partially because, of course, it's like it's well rated for the type of fine art print that is able to reproduce, and it's also because of their papers and the amount of effort that they put in matching up their ink technology to their paper. Because oftentimes something you might run into is that you buy a paper that there are places where you can buy paper alone, and like when you buy the paper, it's not a paper that the printer recognizes. So you have to request the resources from the paper company itself. And you think, why didn't everything go well? And it's usually because maybe those inks don't necessarily work on that paper alone. Sometimes it gives you a different result, so it could be cool. But that was another motivator for me to be able to get a Canon printer. I also really love that is able to do the edge to edge printing. I really love that you can do a roll adapter in the back. So down the road, I can print a panoramic photo. It'll still be 13 inches in width, but it can be longer in height or in length. So those are other motivators. It is one of the easiest. There's a few out there in the market that just for entry level for a small shop that wants to do fine artwork, but at a lower cost and overhead. And I thought that was a reasonable decision for me to make, taking into account there's paper as overhead, there's shipping costs as overhead. There's a lot of different things that, you know, not a lot of people think about at first. And so it's a smart way to look at it as like, okay, this is my budget. Where do I want to place most of my investment? The printer was definitely one of the top, next to the paper and the ink. So let's move on here to the page section. And I want to talk about the page section. This is something that a lot of people think, well, why would I need, I mean, the page backgrounds, don't often change it. So I tend to leave it as white. You could change that page background to be able to create that same border section or the sort of dark room experience. But oftentimes I leave it untouched. I think it doesn't give me too many options as to like the width of that border. So I leave it that way. But I do have this identity plate that I can add. And why would you want to add an identity plate? I did have a situation where it was helpful for me to include an identity plate. I sent proofs to a printer who was going to replicate my print at a larger size that I couldn't do at home. And in order to keep my print in, sort of like, it's almost like a form of copyright, it's a form of making sure that that print doesn't get stolen or gets used to be sold elsewhere, I actually added my identity plate on top of it. And that's just a helpful way of you keeping sort of accounts of what's yours. That isn't the same as using a watermark. A watermark is a bit different because it almost acts as a signature. So you can add your own watermark right away. It includes that copyright symbol there. You can even add an @ if that's something that you find more important to you. But if it is a really cool way to sort of solidify to the person who gets your print that this print belongs to that particular artist, right? Like we all want an original. We all want a print that is going to last along the edges, and you don't have to say this is a copy of a copy, but rather this was one of the originals of this artist when they did that particular series. So this is one of those ways that you can maintain that originality by doing your own watermark. In my case, I actually found myself, and this is just, I'll show you this presentation if I get to it. I actually found myself doing, if you didn't get to this presentation, by the way, is in yesterday's live stream where we talked about most of these things and the process. I've wanted to talk about that watermark because I actually chose to do an embossing. So you'll see here on the left-hand side, I chose to do an embossing where I get to showcase the logo of market, and I get to put the volume number. And so that goes directly on the paper and it embosses the paper. So that was another cost that I chose. But if you don't want to do that, this is a really cool way of being able to express that originality and that solidifies that series. And you can put anything here. Of course, you have to take into account it's going to go on top, but it does give you different fonts that you can use so you can continue to follow your brand aesthetic, right? So it does have that option. So if you want to import a logo or something of that nature, then you can do that also here. So that's also great to do sometimes, because I know a lot of us invest in having our own logo brands, and so it's pretty cool to be able to unify that with your final print. Otherwise, you can pretty much have a lot of custom ways of creating and customizing not only like what type of size it is, but like sort of the placement and also the proportion of it. How do you want it fit? Do you want it to be a little bit more inconspicuous, so it's going to be in a different area? Or depending on your composition, you might have an actual dedicated empty space that for a fact that's where your mark goes. For me, it tends to be nice to be able, in the past when I didn't have that embossing feature, I used to love creating out of like a very nerdy, beautiful way of honoring the golden ratio. I would create the golden ratio and place my mark hidden somewhere in there. So if you have a past print of mine, you'll probably find it if you add the golden ratio on there. So this is really cool. You can see the placement here on the anchor. And it's really cool that you're able to customize it and make it your own, as opposed to just sort of have this like, okay, that's the watermark, that's where it goes, write what you must. It has many different ways of doing it.
A comment in the chat from Cody saying that the embossing is really cool. And I agree, that's really neat. It's that is not a Lightroom feature.
No, it's not a Lightroom feature, but it was, designed on Illustrator, so still in there, part of our Adobe family.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's like, part of building that brand that you want and how you want your work to be experienced. But I always think like, okay, so if I don't want to spend money, like what options do I have? And it does help to be able to have options. Like if I was to think of doing this, my favorite way of doing this would have been to add my logo. I think that's a really cool way. I might actually do that in the future because my logo is just the letter C. So it's very minimal. It's not obtrusive to the image. And in fact, it might actually add value to the image. So if you do a small series that you don't want to have to spend the time to sign in a different way, that is a digital signature that you can incorporate. And we have arrived at the print job. The print job is really easy if you really think about it, but where it can get weird is when you have to troubleshoot between what your print settings are, like your page setup and your print settings here. So what happens, the usual dialogue that we're very familiar with is this here, right? It often comes with the printer or it's just the go-to, it takes you here. This is great. It can honestly show you a lot of different things that you can do here. But since we made a lot of our decisions already on Lightroom, it makes more sense to have all of our work completely done via there. So you have to manually tell Lightroom whether to do the print adjustments based on Lightroom or do them based on the print dialog. So I would run into some issues in the past where it was like, what happened? I adjusted some brightness here, I adjusted things here, why didn't it do it? It was because I hadn't told it to ignore the print dialog settings and do the print management based on Lightroom. So that if you want it to do sort of like that setting, you want to be able to say, okay, I'm going to do all the settings here. There's also this draft mode printing, which is just basically a printing that is going to be easier on the inks. So it's not necessarily like the full-on prints. That's a good option to have. So it's not going to do a fine art print right off the bat. In the printing resolution, I always leave it at 240 ppi. And what that means is that if your image is anything under 240 ppi, which is pixels per inch, but it reflects in your print as dots per inch because it's the dots of ink. When I have an image that's smaller than 240, then it'll automatically make it 240, which means it'll enlarge it a bit. And the way it does it is actually fairly good because it's working with the raw file. So it's honestly like doing that Sensei's doing that pretty well in terms of like just resizing, because that could be tricky business. So that I like to set at 240. I don't like going to under 240. And yesterday we talked about what that means. If you're willing to sacrifice that number, that means you're sacrificing the detail, but you are getting a larger size image. Okay, so I've gone as far as like 180 in the past, trying to enlarge an image. I did lose detail, but I printed on a a canvas texture, which compensated for that because it was sort of like already textured. So I wasn't able to visibly see sort of blurry pixels. And that is something that can happen just by the nature of printing ink into paper. The ink will sort of dissolve and make your details a little bit softer. So That's also important in this next step here. So it does have a way to make up for that by using the print sharpening. So most typically I like to use standard because it really does help a little bit more. We did do in the developing stage, we did do added a little bit more of that clarity, or push that contrast a bit, so that we did keep more of the detail, keeping in mind that it was going to blur out a bit. But at the very end, you also have an option. So all of these options are sort of universal, so they're impacting the entire image. The reason why I choose to edit for print is because during the editing process, I'm doing those edits thinking of print, but targeting each section individually, as opposed to just sharpening everything, as opposed to just brightening everything. I'm able to target highlights, target shadows, target the clarity, and target those specific details, so that I'm staying more true to my image and not just exploiting the way it can be pushed and pulled. But I do include a little bit of sharpening at the end just to help it, but try not to be too extreme on that end. Here it asks what type of media type. It frankly only asks two, because between many different substrates that you might use, at the end of the day, it lies between the two. It's either glossy, somewhere around matte, somewhere around glossy. I like to put, if I do standard on matte, it sharpens it a little bit more than usual, because matte does make all the ink really, really flat. If I do standard on glossy, it just sharpens it kind of quite exactly what I wanted. So keep that in mind. So like if it is on matte, I probably would just put low, because then that just like levels out everything. This 16-bit output, I'm not entirely sure what that's for. I have some idea that it has to do with sort of the digital output, so I kind of leave it alone. Here in the profile section, that's really the part where like people ask, like, wait, what about those ICC profiles? Like, what do we do? Isn't that part of printing? This entire workflow was to make up for the fact that you might not have an ICC profile. This entire workflow is to make up for the fact that you might not have one of those calibrated, expensive monitors, because we're doing this homemade print, but nonetheless a fine art print. So you don't really have to worry about this entirely, but if you did go out of your way to ask for an ICC profile from your printer, from Canon, or from your papers, you could in fact upload them here, or sometimes when you install your printer, they come equipped with some ICC profile. So you can see my ICC profile here. So you'll see all of these different ones that I've installed here in the past, or that I have preloaded because of the Canon installation. So the paper that I'm using uses this Pro Luster paper. There's all these different ones here, but if you didn't have those, you're able to compensate for the issue in color by doing all of these basically hacks and tricks that help you compensate for the color and the brightness and all of the cool things that we've been learning today and yesterday. So when it comes to the intent, perceptual and relative is pretty much how the printer is going to make up for a color that I can't really create, right? There's the color gamut is pretty expansive. We are printing in RGB, so that gamut is small enough that it should be able to your printer should be able to be equipped to cover all of those colors. That's the reason why it's not good to print in CMYK, because you're asking it to do colors that it doesn't deliver in that specific way. Or if you were to do an RGB that's larger than usual, that also can be tricky. So in order to compensate for that, it asks you, well, do I do this relative or perceptual? Typically perceptual works out really great for me. So I noticed that the purples stay truer to that purple hue, as opposed to turning a bit more on the I guess digital side, where they turn really magenta and things look more digitized and less natural colors. And when you're printing something that's like street photography or nature, keeping those colors natural is very, very important. But if you were to print graphics like a poster or a design, or maybe a mixed medium where you have design on top of photography, I love doing that too. Then I would use relative because it does kind of just make it a bit more sharp on those purple hues and those blue hues. And the print adjustment is pretty much, again, a universal action on the brightness and contrast. And that lets you know how prioritized that effect is. So you can choose to brighten or contrast your image, but you'll see here that the actual live view of that isn't as true as when we're working on our develop modules. So like if I actually push my highlights here, like you're able to see it right away. And that is going to immediately reflect on your print. But when we do it here, I just don't have too much of a gauge of how that looks. Plus, it's a universal action on my entire photo, as opposed to me targeting the highlights on the clouds and making sure. Also, the other reason why I don't like doing that is because here in the develop module, I'm able to make sure if there's any clipping happening by pressing the letter J, and I'm able to see, okay, well, I'm over clipping, and if I'm over clipping, it'll show sort of that clip over. I don't know why it's not reflecting now, but hey, we've seen it here before. So I like to be able to have that control over targeting each section. And to me, that taking that into account in the editing process gives me more peace of mind, knowing that that's going to be reflected in the print section without having to focus too much here.
Cyn, just a heads up to you and to our audience as well. In about 8 minutes, we'll do the artist spotlight, where we take a look at an artist's work on Behance. So just a little heads up that that's coming.
Awesome. Excited to see that. Yeah. I've honestly loved being able to see the work that all of you are doing, because it tends to change so much. I would host these photo walks, and I will always see how many new aspiring artists would join the game of photography. So I'm excited to see this. Okay, so yeah, most of the time I leave this print adjustment sort of without tampering too much with it. I might do like a tad bit of adjustment. It will be very, very subtle, because I already know that I took that into account in my final print. And so from here, we're pretty much ready to print. We send this out to the printer. You can send it out here by manually clicking print. Usually I've noticed that my first print has to actually come from pressing print here, because it basically connects them both, and it lets them know that they're working together. And then my second print, I'm able to do it directly from this print button here, and I can continuously do it over and over. So that's like a wonderful way to just sort of find yourself in a place where you just know that, okay, I can relax now. My print is going to be represented the right way. It's going to reflect the colors that I want, and it's also going to not waste my resources, right? Like that's also a big part of this entire game that we're playing here, or this entire journey that we're embarking on. So I want to let you know that all of these settings are also able to be saved. So you have these like different sections here. I know that's something that like just eases my process. So saving your collection, saving these things in your collection, saving these templates on your in your template section is always going to kind of just make the headache of having to do the print and all these different settings all over again, a little bit, making the process a little bit smoother. So always remember that one of the biggest perks for me, at least, is having using or utilizing the organization that is set in place in Lightroom, because I did frequent a lot of my prints frequently came from me playing around in Photoshop, like single use, single editing, single print processing. Whereas here, I'm able to take on several images at a time, and I'm able to just choose how I print them and set up all the settings and save them time and time again, knowing that I have something that's going to work every single time that I do it. So using up these organizations is probably something that is very underrated. And once you get the hang of it and like really understand the user interface of your space, then you're able to kind of like take that on a little bit. I like also saving my workspace just to be able to like have that ready whenever I jump right on it. I'm going to put these in here just to save them for my next round, because I think I'm going to make a small collectible. I think actually back to that question, I think you do have to double click in order to move around the frames, but it's just a regular layout section just to be able to move these files around and probably put them closer to the edges. And let me know in the comment section which is your favorite print, because I like to be able to repeat that print several times and put it up on the shop. I'm always very curious. That's another way that I like to get your input, is creating polls and getting a sense of which prints are the type of image, which images are the type of images that you would love to have in your home, or prints that you would like to collect. At the end of the day, you know, I will always print the ones that I absolutely love and I absolutely feel like are a good representation of my photographic journey. So always remember that, you know, your perspective and your eye is very specific to your point of view. So as much as having you know, the decisions as a collective, it is really cool to be able to collaborate and cooperate with your customer or you know, your audience in general. Is also important to kind of keep up with the way you see your work and don't undervalue that, because at the end of the day, I think that's what brings the enthusiasm back into your work, right? Like you're expressing your work in photo series, and that could actually be like a whole nother way that your audience can experience your work and be excited about it.
Cyn, we have less than 2 minutes before we do the artist spotlight, and maybe I'll just use a little bit of that time to say that there was a question earlier that you spoke to about dragging the photo within the cell to crop the photo differently within a cell. And when you're in the single image / contact sheet layout style, which you were previously, you can just drag the photo and it'll move it within the cell. But when you're here in the custom package, if you just click and drag, it's going to move the cell, not the photo.
The cell,
and if you want to move the photo within the cell, you hold down the Command key on Mac or the Control key on Windows.
Mm-hmm.
I think
there you go.
Is that working?
Our little hand.
Yep.
Yeah. So let me see. I think, yeah, well, the command comes out. There it is. Okay. We didn't have any more room to our left, but there it is. Nice. So I'm able to play with my composition. Thank you for that tip.
All right.
Yeah,
I think
because
we're
you want to
about
be able
ready
to be awesome.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Cyn. Go ahead.
No worries.
Let's see here. I think we're about ready for the artist spotlight. And let's see, we'll switch over to my screen. There it is. All right, here is our artist spotlight for today. So this is something that we do during the show where we highlight the work of a particular artist on Behance. If you would like to nominate yourself or someone else, there's a form above the chat pod on behance.net where you can do that. And then you will have an opportunity to be featured here as well. So I'm really excited to take a look at this with you, Cyn, here. And I'm gonna just click on welcome to my portfolio. And this is the work of Kamile, I'd say, and I'm not going to embarrass myself with trying to pronounce the surname there, but I'll say Kamile. And it looks like this is the handle here, Serenaite. We'll say Kamile. I like Kamile. And so it looks like Kamile works across a lot of different disciplines here, and I, of course, want to take a look at the photography, if that's okay with you, Cyn.
Yeah.
Go in there. And you know what? I will confess that I took a peek at this earlier today before our show started. And there was one image that grabbed me right away that I'd like to look at, which was this one here, which just seemed, I don't know what you think when you look at this, Cyn. For me, this was so, I was like, what am I looking at? And it's just a combination of everything. It's the upside down, but it's also this kind of like, is it milky, cloudy water that's making a sort of disembodied state to this head? I just thought it was really...
I think it is really interesting. I mean, if you really look at it from, I guess, a viewpoint of just like the way this person was able to photograph or edit it in post. I really like when someone breaks the rules and says, you know, who's to say that this is supposed to be right side up? Who's to say this is supposed to be a perfect angle? That gives you know, the viewer a little bit of like, I mean, these same rule breaking attitudes happen in like cinema, right? When somebody's trying to make you feel a little bit disoriented because that's just what they're trying to express. And I love that you put this upside down because it does feel disoriented, yet her expression is calm. So I love when there's a bit of like contrast there. Because you could have chosen to put that right side up and I wouldn't have been questioning a single thing. And so that's a really good decision there. I also like the purple hue around, I imagine it's like milk. I'm not even going to try to consider how you photograph this, but rather I love that you're bringing me into this place of fantasy and space. And you didn't take away like that, you know, you didn't take away like the opportunity to add color. You actually added some like beautiful purple hues there. And I think maybe it was a bit borrowing from your light conditions, but being able to re-accentuate that is a great touch. And I think it really complements the skin color too.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I agree, it's a great observation you made. The picture is sort of simultaneously jarring and peaceful, which is like quite an accomplishment.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at some other stuff here. Is there a particular photo that you'd like me to click in on to see bigger, Cyn?
Yeah, I can see there's a lot of portraits. I'm not sure if there are self-portraits, but it's really interesting to see. We can right away see some of her favorite color palettes. You can start to see that purple kind of show up in a few other images. When you click on, I'm really like wanting to click on all the cat images, but we'll refrain.
I don't know. I think, you know what, this one might be worth a visit here. Like this, taking cat imagery in a whole different direction, I feel like.
This is really funny because just yesterday we were talking about how being constricted at home can sometimes mean that you may feel like you don't have the right subject matter, and like finding these light spotlights at home at a certain time of the day can actually inspire you to create your own teeny tiny studio with a very willing subject, you know. So I love that because, you know, we really have more of an expression of technique here, and an understanding of color as well, because you can see that, you know, she understands that the way these colors are marrying each other was something interesting to capture. So I'm glad you picked up your camera for that.
Yeah, it's cool. It's like noir cat. I love it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, chiaroscuro. Yeah, so I really like that photo with I don't know what's happening here in this situation, but if you go down a little bit, you have multiple people or some of these images. I guess it's like behind the scenes. I like
are you
this
looking at
photo
like some of
here.
these? Sorry, which one? Let me
Um,
back out. Which one
yeah,
are you looking at?
yeah. I was looking at this one, the black and white one, where someone's in the center. There's like three people.
Is this?
That one's no, not that one. The very
Oh,
below that
the
one.
bottom
That
row.
one.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think it's so funny that, we're including these images. I'm not really sure why, because some other images are so specific and really like curated, but I think it's probably because you have a drawn, you're being drawn to natural and sort of like not natural moments, right? Like candid moments. And that's really important to note, that you're putting appreciation in candid moments, because that same discipline that you're adapting to something that you can control, like a studio session, can, in those same techniques, can be applied to some of your candid shots, as you did with the cat. So I would say continue to like pursue that, because I'm just like a lover of all things that are just part of like life, right? And just like they're happening, and we just happen to have the camera there. So I think this is really interesting, from that point of view. Just being drawn to candid shots, I think is really great.
I agree. And I think this photo has something that has a quality that a number of these photos have that I really like, which is that it suggests events happening outside of this moment of time. It suggests before and after, almost a story, like not a story necessarily, but like it makes me wonder what's happening. Like I don't, there's not a story that a
Right.
specific story that I can perceive, but it feels like things are happening, and I'm like, what's going on here? This is cool.
Yeah.
I really like that.
Right.
I really like that sense of the events continuing on beyond the moment of just the photo. It's really cool.
Yeah. And I think you can also approach, so you see this image. So this one's a little bit more polished. You probably had the opportunity to tell your subjects what to do, or maybe you got to be lucky and catch a moment where they were being natural, and that's great. But I can sense that they were there for this photograph. So there's a bit, we've just seen three different layers here. We've seen a photograph that was curated specifically, very very much done in a studio session, or I'm not sure, but you can tell it was very intentional in terms of taking a photograph. This is arriving in somewhere in the middle of a candid shot and a prepared photograph. And then there was that other photograph that you just picked up your camera and decided to click, right? So continue to practice that, because somewhere there's no right or wrong, absolutely not. But somewhere along those lines, being able to decipher and realize the differences will kind of like make you more aware, make your eye sharper on when those moments happen and which one you want to collect.
There's one more I wanted to take a look at. Jan commented in the chat that the portrait in the mirror is fantastic, and I agree. This one really jumped out
Yeah,
at me as well. I really,
awesome.
I love this one. It's so, you know what? And again, it's a disembodied head, but it's so. I'm right. I'm
What
picking
does
up
that
these
mean?
themes. Yeah, but it's
Is this
so
a metaphor?
graphical, right? It's such a it's so kind of a perfectly graphical photo. It's really, it just feels like very well put together.
Yeah.
It's
I
really
really like to
fascinating.
use the word graphic, because it is in a way very I can draw this, right? Like it's like I
Hmm.
can design this. There's clear shapes, and not just that, but there's like the primary colors. We have here the red and the blue, like
Hmm.
just directly. And so we're it's almost like an homage to those very graphic illustrations or expressions. The circle, basic shape. So if you wanted to approach something from a minimalistic viewpoint, like being able to reference design and not just photography can be a really great resource for you to just be able to implement and have like a back archive in the back of your brain, right? For moments like this.
That might be a good segue here. There's a lot of other, what am I looking for here? The X. There's a lot of other non-photographic work that Kamile has here, and I feel like we should take a quick look at some of that before we step back. I wanted to look at the posters. Is that okay? Is that?
Yeah, I was gonna say the posters.
And I haven't had a chance to look at this other stuff yet, but this is really cool. Oh, I really like. Can we just look at this first one?
Yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah. That's really nice.
Yeah, that's great.
So this is like for an event, I think. Young Musician of the Year. Mm-hmm. It's really cool how you're able to use like the composition of the circle and the actual like music, sort of like to be able to like put the typography around it and utilizing that. So not just to leave everything centered, which often I think that's the challenge of a designer, is like, how do you get someone to read something in a way where it doesn't get boring and dull? I think the next one was really interesting. I really like the typographic expression on that one. Like, yeah, I love that. I really love that. And I also like the fact that you have this sort of organization, but it's still very expressive. The color palette's really nice too. Like, oh, it's a huge gamut of colors, right? Like, why do we always tend to go for like the basics? I think being able to select like a color that isn't used as often in graphic design is one of my favorite things to do. Like finding a combination that you don't often see can already make your work more stand out. Although, like we saw on the image, on the photograph, actually going to the primary colors was a way to kind of nod back to design in a way. I don't know if intentional, but that's the way I'm reading it, and I'm rolling with it.
Yeah, do it. I'm with you. Well, listen, I want you to have some time to wrap up here, but can we take a look at one more here before we jump back to your stuff, Cyn? Is there one of these, or would you like to step back out and look at another area of work? What's your preference?
Oh yeah, I was curious to see the logos.
Okay, let's take a look at that.
The logos say a lot about a person.
Oh, I love the.
Okay. I mean, the Elvis.
This is perfect. Yeah, this is really catchy. I like that.
You see, so this really like lets me see how, well, in a way, I'm glad that she has a design background, because you can see how that is blending into the photographic expressions. So it really just reinforces that idea, because it was a very special journey for me to be able to step outside of my design shoes and decide to venture out into photography. And what was really gratifying was learning that, in fact, they have a lot more common ground than I knew. And they're not completely separate animals. So I would give her the advice of like continue to channel that, like kind of just push forward with that, because having a design background is not something that everybody has, and vice versa, right? Like if you're a photographer and you want to learn design, just know that the same color principles, the same layout, this composition applies to layout design and where you place things in the right order. So there's a lot more common ground there that I think is worth investigating.
It's so great that you have all that background, Stan. Like for me, I feel like I can speak intelligently about photos, and then when I look at, graphic design things like this, I'm like, cool. And that's kind of like, I don't know what to say about it. So it's great that you have the vocabulary to talk about all this stuff. That's really, really neat.
Yeah.
Well, Kamile, thank you so much. It's been really, really great to see your work here. I am going to turn things back over to you, Cyn. We'll just do a little screen switch over here, get things all lined up so you can see Cyn's screen.
Give me a second here.
For the grand finale of our show today. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be great. And I'll say, all right, and there we go. Cyn, we have about 10 minutes before we have to wrap up.
Awesome. So I wanted to bring this back to the very start. I honestly think that if you can take away a few things from this is it's worth to experiment and experience new mediums, both as an artist who wants to, showcase your work and want different ways to not only like have visibility, but also have like a way to just keep your work, I guess, in record too. That's pretty awesome. But having the visibility is such an important thing for just the growth of us as as artists. So I would think that doing this process honestly has been very inspirational for me. So I hope it was very inspirational for you. For me, it has been a very much a space where I've learned to grow more on respecting the print medium and respecting also the amount of tools that I have at my disposal, because I've been working on Lightroom for a very long time, and yet there are some spaces that I don't utilize as often, and for maybe because I didn't need to at the time, and I was perfectly happily in the dialogue section, like perfectly happily. And but it's just interesting because we do have these like really wonderful tools at our disposal, but we once we learn them, I used to say this about my camera until like I really learn every single button, I don't want to move on. I think it's gratifying to be able to learn every single button and see what type of tools and tricks you're able to learn there. I think this experience, being able to create my own shop, being able to do this during quarantine and having the tools at my disposal to be able to do that has been really like particular in that I had a huge learning curve ahead of me and I had no idea. Learning curve from a technical standpoint, learning curve from, hey, being a small business owner and understanding overhead, understanding communications online, and how to also get people intrigued and interested, right? Like at the end of the day, I learned that, you know what, like the people who are going to be interested are the same folks who are intrigued by your photographs and are the same folks who are just really happy that you're sharing your journey with them. So I'm glad that you're here and are able to hopefully pick up some inspiration from this too, because that really that's really how I've been able to feel this entire journey myself. And I wanted to show you finally some of my work and also some of the things that are available. I recently set up my filters from Lightroom, and that, like as I mentioned before, it was a really interesting thing that not enough people talk about, is being an editor with like a lot of creativity, where you're not so specific on like a single way of editing your photos, but rather you experiment. And so this is one of my go-to filters that I like to use on my Lightroom. So I created this filter directly on Lightroom, and in Lightroom they're called presets, which I have always called them presets since. So this is the way this one works. It specifically works for really bright ambiances, but like any filter, you always want to be able to jump into Lightroom and retouch some little things like the brightness and change things up, because the light conditions are different for everything. But you can see it's like very natural, and it gives just that extra oomph to your images. And so when you want to set up your presets, my favorite thing to do when it comes to saving my presets or uploading presets from other artists, if you do that, I think it's like really cool to have your own collection of presets. So the way you do it is you set up, you go here, the same way you create a preset, plus sign, you create the presets. You can also manage presets, and that will take you to, well, import presets, sorry. And that will take you to wherever you downloaded your file. And so you should be in your downloads folder, and you just select the file, and right away it'll import it and it'll appear in your file so you can change it. So I have a few different ones here. You can see how it drastically changes my colors. some of these are inspired from different journeys. And so if I'm taking any of these images that I added a filter on into print, like I said before, best takeaway, always focus on your brightness, focus on your contrast, and focus on your shadows, because those are the things that are going to be tempered with the most in terms of like replicating this into print. I really like this filter here.
It's working. Whoa. Cyn, can I ask you a question?
It's working. It's magic.
I have a question of my own, actually. This is not from the chat.
Yeah.
Do you mind switching back to your shop real quick?
Yeah.
To where you had your prints listed for sale?
Yeah.
I was curious about, and if anybody's interested in looking at this, it looks like Cody put the link to Cyn's print shop in the chat, so that's there for you. But what I was curious about in looking at this is, and sorry, keep in mind we have about 5 minutes left. I was curious to know how you decide how to price your prints.
Well, overhead takes a big part of that. It's also, there's several things, right? Because you want to be fair. There's a degree of that honestly would price my images far more than they're at right now. But I take on a lot of that, considering that quantity is more. So I want to make some of these prints available to people who want to support me and want to have a print of mine in their home. So I think about that too. Some of those things are like not necessarily just like a business decision, but rather like I want my prints to be enjoyed. And things like shipping, things like in general, just being able to reprint them, the paper, all those things do play a role. But I more often than not, I like considering that option of like, who can enjoy my photo, right? I have a print that is framed. So that was something to consider, was that I have, taken the extra step to create a print that fits into a frame with the padding, making sure it's pristine, it works. So you're getting the frame, which changes the cost of shipping. So all those things become variables in the print that you get. Luckily for you, you don't have to take on any of that headache or that process. It's just, it arrives at your home happily. And so that kind of influences the cost, but overall, like that's honestly like just fair pricing is a different way of thinking it, right? Like fair pricing it for people to have your prints is probably one of the most important parts.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear that. It sounds very much like you've deliberately priced it to make it as accessible as possible to people.
Yeah.
It's kind of what I'm hearing.
Yeah, exactly.
And it feels like that looking at these. I mean, if I were to go and order a 13:9 print of one of my own photos from an online, print provider, it would cost $40 just to, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And without it being anybody's artwork, so yeah, it's interesting.
Right.
It does feel like you've priced these very accessibly. Yeah. And I was just wondering about how you arrived at that. Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, I'm printing smaller ones to make that even that much more accessible. But it's not only that. I think like I said, I have some work here that belongs to my friend, and like that, supporting your friends, $20 that you spend on subscriptions or anything else, right? Like supporting your friends is such a big deal that I think we have such a huge network of designers and creatives. I'm sure so many people. And I feel like the biggest thing we can do is be able to support our friends. Like if I think, oh man, I really like, I wish I had this thing. Oh, one of my friends makes pottery. So support that. Support different types of mediums that your friends are working on. Because we do put a lot of work into it, right? That's kind of like the fun part, but also, hopefully the part that gets taken into account.
For sure. Well, you know what? I think that is a really fantastic note for us to go out on. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. A huge thank you to Cyn as well. I want to give a quick note. The live stream that was originally scheduled to follow immediately after this one, unfortunately, had to be canceled for today, but there will be an XD design challenge coming up at 2 p.m. Pacific time today. Cyn, again, thank you so much. It's been really fantastic to see your work and to see your process and how you perfect your photos for prints. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.